It's another Tuesday, and we've got another wild ride for you coming up on Worlds Asunder.
Yeah, I didn't do any world building for the book. I just literally sat down and was like, where do I want to start? Well, back to the beginning, right? Like and it was cool because I had done all this world building that didn't make it into the pilot. Like I had worked on all this stuff, and you know, there's an assassination that's like the inciting incident to my novel, right? Like, but that was like a year removed in the pilot. Like we were already into the war. Like it wasn't even the thing. It got referenced, but that's it. So I was kind of excited. So I did all this work. I get to actually show it now, right?
The stories we've read capture our attention and immerse our minds in settings of all kinds to bring us the spectrum of feelings and deliver the tale of tales to our starving psyches.
Whether it's medieval-style fantasy with mages and knights,
or hard sci-fi takes on the future of space colonization,
or thrillers set in your backyard, world building is the foundation that holds up the narrative, the glue that keeps it from unraveling as readers follow the journey you laid out for them, all to make the stories jump from the pages and burn themselves into our memories.
Welcome, weary writers, to Book Career in a Year's network of podcasts. This is Worlds Asunder, an insightful podcast on world and character building.
My co-host is the one and only David Shadoin, better known as Shady. It's not just a descriptor, it's also his moniker.
And she's the H.Y. Gregor, but you can call her Haley or Sour Patch, your friendly post-apocalyptic wasteland elf.
We know. We have nearly a score of published novels and short stories between us, but who the hell are we to teach you about world building and character development? We get it, which is why we decided to call in some favors.
Each week, we pull from a list of the best and brightest authors, editors, and publishers to give tips and guidance on tackling the age-old questions and provide you with tools on how to accomplish world building like the pros. From environment to magic to characters, how do we strike a balance between what matters to our audiences and what matters to keep it all straight? Open up your ear holes
and your minds
and get ready for us to tear Worlds Asunder.
So, if you're ready,
just knock and enter. Welcome back, guys, to Worlds Asunder, the only podcast that's going to tell you to recharge your glass right before we start, so that way it's more enjoyable.
I can't do that.
I hope there's some.
Really let me run to my kitchen.
This week's unofficial sponsor is Naked Wines, who delivered that wine bottle to me about a month ago.
Thank you for not being naked on camera. We appreciate the sacrifice.
What if we're half naked?
Don't want to know.
Well, stand up, James.
Nope.
Shady wants to know.
I always want to know. This week, our guest is he's got 5 film credits to his name, I believe. 4 as a director, 5 as a writer, 5 as a producer, executive producer, I believe, on all 5. And he's got the Soul Saga series, which the first book was the first book he had produced when he made the jump from screenwriter to novelist, as well as In Darkness Dwells that he co-authored. Our guest today, the amazing James Fox. Welcome to Worlds Asunder.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. I'm a big fan.
Big fan. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks. As always, Haley and I are co-hosting Worlds Asunder with. So we're gonna grill James on all of the things you all want to know, and hopefully drag out some tidbits of world building from him. So first, I kind of went through some of your credits that I was able to find relatively quickly, but tell us a bit about your background. Tell us, how did you get started in the film industry and then make the jump over to producing novels, and then what hats have you worn in the film world?
Okay. Well, there's one of those I can answer really quickly. I think I've done just about every job on set. So at one point or another, I mean, if you count unpaid, for sure. But I've been paid for a lot of the big jobs on set. So like I've done just about everything. I will never claim to have been good at everything. There's a lot of those that I would never hire myself to do. But I've been in the industry 22 years. I've done everything from acting to sound to visual effects, editing, directing. I'm primarily a director, and producer, and writer. So story has been my lifeblood for 2 decades. And then making the jump to author was actually kind of a weird story. So I wrote a TV pilot and developed the whole show Bible, started pitching it, and I was getting some really good traction. It was winning tons of awards, lots of people interested in it. And I couldn't get that like last little bit of excitement that would get me a check and get a deal done. And every time it was, well, if this was based on a pre-existing IP, we would have done it. So the last session I went into, I was just like, that's it. I wanted to flip the desk, and I was like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to write the freaking book, right? And I stormed out of the office. And 3 months later, this whole Saga Revolution was written. So,
Spite novel.
Yes, it was 100% spite. But I also felt like, like if that was the stumbling block, I would just solve that stumbling block. Like, there, look, it's based on a book, right? Ta-da, the end. But I got so much enjoyment out of actually writing the novel. I like the same kind of like enjoyment I get out of a finished film and like, having it launch and people give reviews, whatever. You get the same thing with books, but it doesn't take millions of dollars and hundreds of people and 7 years to get done, right? So I was like, this is great. Maybe I'll just do more of this. Yeah. So I have kind of been addicted ever since, and I'm kind of like straddling the fence between filmmaker and author.
So, hot take from James Fox. Writing novels is so much easier than doing film.
So easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
the question is, are we doing the opposite of inspiring writers, or are we crushing a bunch of people with film dreams?
No. I think that film is totally something that you can and should do if you feel compelled to do it. It's not easy though. It's not. You have to literally be addicted and obsessed with it to survive. It's hard. It's a hard gig. I feel like everybody wants to be a filmmaker. Everybody would be a filmmaker if they could. So it's really hard for a reason. Yeah. I mean, I try to leave the industry every day and can't. So there you go.
Somebody send help. We'll flash up his near address soon, so that way you can send a rescue team.
If only we knew a helicopter pilot.
If only.
Huh.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but for some of our listeners who may be unfamiliar with film, can you lay out the main differences between expectations for like a screenplay versus a novel?
Sure. I mean, the big one is a screenplay is kind of more of a roadmap for action and dialogue to get stuff done, right? To translate the story into a visual medium. Whereas a story needs to be kind of an entire thing. You need to have, if it's not on the page, it's not there. So like if there's internal monologue happening, you need to have that. If there's smells, like how do you film a smell? Unless there's an actor reacting to it, you can't, right? So that's really kind of the main difference is the script is kind of a distilled, just the facts kind of, roadmap to get a story filmed. A novel is the whole story. Like it should be the whole thing, right? So they're kind of like two ends of the same story spectrum.
Yeah, and I guess the way I think about it a bit is like where we add a lot of details in novels, you're stripping a lot of details away and allowing directors to kind of feel out the play of the scene and make those details for themselves. Is that relatively accurate?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate.
Well, and actors. So now that you have written a novel and you have complete control over what your characters do, does it ever kill you when you're watching something that you've written and the actor reads it totally differently than what you'd imagined or envisioned for it? I feel like that would wound me. Yeah,
so there's a reason why one of the areas that I'm specializing in is adaptations, right? That's one of the things that I really like is, I want to take something as a fan and I want to try to do as best justice as I can. Obviously in translation, stuff has to change and there's, like you write 5 pages about the way something smells. I mean, I don't know. I can't do anything with those 5 pages. And if that's a really important part of the the novel, we're going to have to figure out a way to bring that into it, right? So I think that there's a lot to be said about how things get translated. But also, like, film is very much like a business, right? Like, it's lots of moving parts, it's lots of people. There's a lot of stuff that goes into, especially adaptations. So it can be tricky. It can be a really, like, tough tightrope to walk.
So, what was it like to transition from screenplays to novels? I think you touched on it a little bit when you talked about your own transition, but what did you expect when you did it? Right, when you decided to spite write Soul Saga Revolution, what were you expecting to happen? And then, were those expectations met? And what weren't you expecting?
I expected to be super good at it and just, like, whip it out, no problem. I mean, I already type really fast. I do story every day, I thought that things were going to be really easy. And then I started writing, and I was like, this is going to be great. And I remember I was in a Starbucks, and I started just, like, chapter 1, page 1, whatever, started panning out keys. I got chapter 1 done. I was like, this is great. Got chapter 2 done. This is great. Got chapter 3 done. I was like, I'm almost done with this story. And I was like, So I went back through and I was like, I'm literally just writing a script in novel format. Like, it was just action dialogue. There was nothing internal, no descriptions. It was just the bare bones story. I was like, oh, this is going to be a lot harder than I thought. So I wrote my first 5 chapters probably about 15 times. Just like, because I'd get it. It would be like 500 words, and it was like 700 words, and it was like 1,500 words, and it was like 5,000 words, and I had to scale way back, and then, so I think the biggest challenge for me was determining pace, and, like, how much was too much description. And I tell everybody the first 5 chapters of my first book are my worst. They're the worst that I've written. It's the worst thing that I've written probably ever, because I mean, I don't think it's bad, but comparatively, like, you can tell that I, like, hit my stride, like, chapter 6 on, because those first 5 chapters were me trying to figure out the medium and me trying to figure out pacing and how much detail was important and what moved the story along and what didn't. So, yeah, my expectations were, like, dashed up on the rocks and broken within the first, like, couple hours of, I figured I'd have a book done in a week. I was like, this is gonna be great. I did the math. It was a disaster. So, I mean, I really had to do some soul searching. I mean, I left that Starbucks just like a miserable wreck and questioning all my life choices. I was like, this should have been easy, and instead I want to cry.
I think all writers have done that at some point. So welcome to the club.
Yep. Yeah. I think we all have to have that mirror moment, which is a writing term for those of us who are paying attention. Anyway. Welcome to the Worldbuilding podcast. Full of very obvious clues. Now, but it kind of made me think a little bit. So, we talked a little bit about it on your podcast, Ink and Effort, when we discussed community building and stuff. You would go to the Starbucks and write, but the other piece being, we had kind of talked about the writer communities, and I'm going to digress just a little bit and steal some of your thunder. Okay. What did you find difference between the communities when it came from, like, screenwriters versus writing with writing? You wrote with a co-author for In Darkness Dwells. So mm-hmm. How is that different than working in, say, like, a writer's room? Now, I don't know if you had ever worked in a big writer's room before, so I'm kind of taking guesses.
Yeah, so I had. Working in a writer's room, everyone varies, right? But the one that I worked in was very much like the stock exchange with story. It's like people passing laptops around, throwing show Bibles around, like, the showrunner kind of like directing traffic. It's very much kind of a high pressure environment where you're, like, time is money and you're trying to get stuff done as quickly as possible. And, like, author writing community is for the most part very chill, very helpful, like, lots of introverts, so it's like everybody's just kind of like, going at their own pace and accepting. And the writing or the film community is very accepting too, in its own way. It's just, it's again kind of like apples and oranges, right? Like it's distilled down to a business, and it's still creative, but it is like the sharpest level of creativity and as efficient as you can be. At least when you're like working like on a show or something. When you're working like features, it can be a little bit more mellow. Like I've co-written features before, and it's a lot of like sitting around and drinking coffee and brainstorming and just like world building. I think to kind of bring world building into it a little bit. Like I really build my worlds like meticulously because of the film, right? Because if somebody asks a question about orbital attack vectors and how it's going to look for visual effects, I need to know. Like you can't just make it up, and some people do, and that's where you get some of those like weird shots in the films where you're like, whoa, wait, that's not right? Because in film it's like you always have an answer, you don't always have to be right. So I think that the big thing is as far as communities go, they're the same. It's just there's an emphasis on different things. I think they're very supportive, but one is kind of more. There's a bigger emphasis on like being creative and like figuring out your process, and the other one is like screw your process, get it done, right? So it's a little bit different.
Do you think the writing community could benefit from changing a little? I almost brought this up when we were recording for you. Authors often will refer to their books as their book babies, and it's precious. It's and Stephen King has his kill your darlings, right? Like you can't love it, you have to let it go kind of a thing. And someone once said to me that if you call it a book baby, that is your child and you can't change it because you're stuck on it as it is. And sometimes there's not that like business kind of more aggressive take to it. Do you think that would help more writers be more successful?
I mean, I think it could. I think it might stifle a lot of creativity too. I think some writers kind of need to explore their process. I think that like once you get into it, like once you get into the weeds and you got a few books in and you're like, okay, I'm rolling. I think, like having some like, benchmarks and the kind of a little bit more business minded aspect of it. But I think that kind of comes naturally too. I mean, I see that with authors. Like the first one is kind of a wild ride. Their second one's a little bit more nailed down. By their third one, they're kind of finding their groove, finding their process.
Free rodeos. Noted.
Yeah. So I think yes, they could benefit from a little bit more business aspect of it, but I think again it kind of comes naturally in the process.
Yeah, I like the fact that you talked about like stifling creativity, but you would also the kind of thing that I was going to do to loop it back around to world building. You kind of beat me to the punch a little bit. What was the difference, right? Because you talked about how you world build a lot of your screenplays out and people never see it. But what was was there a difference in process when you went to go write the novel? And obviously like Soul Saga Revolution, you had written the screenplay for already. You've done a lot of the world building for it, and all you did was turn around and write the book. How is that different in like In Darkness Dwells?
Well, so for the Soul Saga, I had the show Bible, I had everything all set up, but the pilot actually starts in like book 3 of the Soul Saga. So like I did all the backstory, in the Bible, right? Here's all the things that happened. Then when I went to go write the novel, I was like, well, I'm going to write about the backstory because if I start where the pilot is, nobody's going to know what the hell's going on. So, and with In Darkness Dwells, because it was an author, A.K. Duboff's Canonical Universe, like I had to get kind of a style guide, and we had many discussions on what she wanted. It was a lead into a new series for her as kind of like a prequel. So it was there was a lot of information that I had to get, and then we kind of did an information dump, and then I went and kind of put together a pitch for a story. I pitched it, and she was like, "All right, cool, go for it." And then we started writing, and we started panning out. I wrote the whole book except for like the last couple chapters, and then I was like, I really hate this. This is not what I started. This is not what I wanted to write. I trashed it and then started fresh. And that was where we landed. So, so I kind of did the world building in my first draft of that. She had her style guide, her information, whatever. We shared that, we swapped it. And then, I literally like worked the world building out in a first manuscript, only to realize that I wasn't telling the story I wanted, and then went back and rewrote it. So
that leads into a good big picture question. What are the primary world building aspects that you focus on? Like Saga for science fiction, but anything you do, right? Screenwriting or writing. And what captures like your imagination? What motivates you to create these different worlds? Like, what was it about the first draft that, where you did a lot of that world building that you went, oh, you know what? The story is not here. I've done too much detail. I need to go find this story.
Yeah. So my philosophy in storytelling in general is very simple plot, right? Like I should be able to tell you my plot in like a few words, one sentence, very, very basic language, but very complex, deep characters and world. So, I build, much like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, right? Like I build very complex settings, very complex bad guys. The characters have lots of depth to them. And so like my idea is I take this very simple plot and then I use the characters in the world to just attack that plot relentlessly until we can resolve the plot. So my world building is all of the extra, right? Like my plot is always very simple. It's like a one-liner on a page, plot, done, right? And then my world building is just like character dossiers, and I do 100-question character write-up for every single character in any of my works. So scripts, novels, whatever. I have a standardized 100-question, written out answer thing that I do for every single character, down to like how many siblings they have, what their siblings do for work, what their political views are. And I've developed that over the years with my screenwriting, because I got asked questions from producers or from actors that blew my mind. And every time I got asked a weird question, I'd add it to this list of questions because, again, like you need answers, right? If an actor turns around and is like, I don't understand why I'm talking like this to my sister. Well, you're talking to your sister like this because in the 3rd grade, she stole a boyfriend from you and you've never forgiven her, right? Like you have to have those things ready to go, and you can't just make it up because it might contradict something else. So yeah, so I have a very robust world building process where I try to answer every question for every character and every thing that's happening in the world so that I can focus on tying it to the plot. And then every chapter tries to peel back a layer of what the plot is and how they're overcoming it.
So, despite your David Weber-like prowess in world building, how long does that actually take you?
What? How long does the world build? Oh my God, it can take forever. I think I spent it was more like 8 months building, doing the world building for the pilot, for Soul, the TV episode that I wrote. And that was a lot. I spent a lot of time with college professors, physics people. I talked to some people at DARPA. I talked to some military contacts that I had. I was just what I really wanted to do with Soul as just a general property was I wanted to take a realistic first look at what fleet-on-fleet action in space would look like for humans, right? Like a first big-scale war, what is that going to look like for us? And, I went down the rabbit hole. I have a 184-page document of notes that I took and put together on just astrophysics and astrocombat and, combat vectoring. And what I found is that it was much more like 13th century naval combat than it was what we see. It's not dogfighting. It's not fighter jets, tailing each other and whatever. It's you get a pass, and it's okay, we'll get to do that again in 4 more hours, right? It's very interesting. It's long range stuff. It's downrange stuff. So, I think that in general, I spent more time. I think the pilot script took me about 10 days to write, but it was 8 months of world building prior to that. So that when I sat down to write that, it was done. It was, I had it in my head. I was ready to go. I just pressed play on the Mind movie and followed along.
But for you also then so then you turned around and wrote a book off of that, and you'd already done a lot of world building. So you could spend time just focusing on the writing because you didn't have to answer a lot of questions.
Yeah, I didn't do any world building for the book. I just literally sat down and was where do I want to start? Well, back to the beginning, right? Like I had, and it was cool because I had done all this world building that didn't make it into the pilot. Like I had worked on all this stuff, and there's an assassination that's like the inciting incident to my novel, right? Like, but that was like a year removed in the pilot. Like we were already into the war. Like it wasn't even the thing. It got referenced, but that's it. So I like was kind of excited because like, oh, I did all this work. I get to actually show it now, right?
That was actually going to be my next question.
Okay.
Was there anything, sorry, Shady, was there anything you did for film that didn't work for the book or that you needed for the book that you hadn't already done? Or was it like complete overlap?
That's a good question. I think that, again, my world building is so robust, right? That when I went to write the book, I was kind of just like, I'm just going to follow along with my backstory timeline. There were some weird pacing things. So there were some things where it's like one character kind of disappeared from the backstory for a little bit because they were just off doing something. I was like, well, they can't just disappear for all of book 2, right? So, I had to kind of like come up with, I was like, well, what were they doing during that time? Like, what was that like? So there was like a little bit more build out, but normally, like as I hit that in the book and I realized there was a pacing issue, the way out was pretty apparent, like I still let the characters speak to me. And there were a few things that happened. Like there's a character that dies that doesn't die in the TV show. But I was writing a scene and I was just like, oh man, I think they've got to die. I think this has got to happen. Like I'm feeling it. Right. So I think I might actually adjust it in the TV series to match, because it was a good moment. But the only reason I found that moment is because, this was like towards the end of where the TV show would be, like ending, like a series finale and, or a show, episode, season finale. And the only reason I found that is because I was in it, right? Like it's just a like 3-sentence episode summary right now because I didn't write the whole season. So yeah, that would be nuts because if it doesn't get sold, I wasted a ton of time and paper. The idea is that, I still let the characters kind of lead me. You know how that happens, or like the character's just begging to die on the page, and you're like, all right, fine, buddy, you get to die. But yeah, so I mean, there were some minor changes, but for the most part, yeah, exactly. For the most part, it was, it was what it was.
No, that's good. So then you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but how do you decide kind of what makes the final cut in your books versus what makes the final cut in your series when it comes to what comes out of your world Bible, and what's just for personal reference for keeping the story straight, so that way you have answers to questions even if you don't need to provide them?
How do I decide what makes the final cut? I think just mostly instinct, really. Like as I'm writing, I'm literally watching the movie in my head, right? Like I said, and I'm trying to dictate along with it. And there are moments where it's like, so I watch something and I'm like, hold on, do I really want to do that? I don't think I do. But I really try to let the characters kind of lead the way. And script writing is very different from that. It's like, I also do like pretty like comprehensive outlines. So it's like, I have a pretty good idea of what the breakdown is, both in screenwriting and in, novel writing. So, it's like, I have the beat sheet. I know what every scene is going to be. It's just a matter of writing it out. That being said, like I am known to delete entire chapters because I get to the end of it and it's like, oh, that didn't need to be there. Delete.
Fatality.
And adding chapters too. So, I wish I had a better answer than this, but it's really just instinct. I'm feeling the story as I go.
That's
so much of it is.
Answer.
Yeah.
I had something else there. You said something and maybe I'll remember it in a minute, but I'm blanking on what triggered me there.
I
say lots of things.
I know.
Sorry.
And you trigger me always. No,
it's because I'm a Niners fan.
Yeah, that's what it is. Previously on Ink and Effort, we discussed the Super Bowl where Kansas City beat the 49ers. Go Chiefs.
Yeah.
Now there's
We
two
won't put on
references.
record whether or not James did or did not cry.
Oh no, I bawled for like a month. Yeah.
You did pace. I was very entertained with
Oh,
all the
yeah.
pacing and the
I was
nail
highly
biting
entertained.
and- yeah.
The best part is James. We're gonna totally
Yeah.
derail world building for a minute. James has the kind of like extrovert energy during a football game that I have internally. So like while I am sitting there going, yes, I love what I see. Like my reactions are very controlled. But James is like up and pacing, and I'm like, I feel you, man. I feel you. I know how that feels, but I just don't.
I'm like flipping couches over and like, like clawing my eyes
Stressing the
out and
dog out.
screaming. Yeah.
No, it was a good time though. We
it
had a
was.
lot of fun. All right, since it still didn't come back, I'm just gonna keep pushing through. But you did mention that you did a bit of research especially for Soul Saga. You took not only did you go to your professors, but I believe you took actual like science courses. You've mentioned that previously.
Yeah. I actually took some science courses too.
So how much world research, now having done this, now you had done it because you were planning on turning this into a screenplay first, to a TV series first.
Yep.
How much research when you went to do like In Darkness Dwells, where you hadn't done all the research ahead of time, how much research would you say that you put towards world building between the two mediums?
Well, for In Darkness Dwells with Amy, like I did a lot of like grilling her for information. Like I did a lot of like, okay, there's a particular bad guy in the script that needed to fulfill a very specific purpose, and we had many discussions about this, and like, I wound up actually having to do some science research on that, and then she's got like wormholes and stuff in her rifts or whatever in her story, so it's like. I kind of want to find out what could happen there and like how, so I still applied some science and whatever, but, it was a little less hard sci-fi. So it was a little bit more just like talking with Amy, kind of developing the story and making sure that at least within its own universe, it answered the questions and didn't have a bunch of like weird tech or plot holes, right? Like I tried very hard to stay away from like the unobtainium and the like handawavium, where it's like, it works because it works. I mean, gravity on ships is probably the only thing that I do that with, because it's just like, it's possible. I don't want to bore everybody with the details of how it's possible. So we're just going to like not discuss it.
That's fair.
So did
It's
you
funny
bring
because-
math
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
into your novels? I'm sorry. I'm imagining all these astrophysics classes with, boards covered in numbers that I didn't know existed, right? How much of that, if any, came into the book? Do you have characters talking about the equations and the kinds of things that you learned, or is it more just informative for you?
It was more just informative for me. So like,
Gotcha.
It was more just like one of my favorite things was, I talked with a surgeon, right? And I was like, if you get shot in low pressure, space or a depressurized ship or like a low pressure planet, what's going to happen? And they're like, it's going to be awful. Like, it's going to, be really, really bad. It's like, well, how would like a field medic save people? And they were like, they wouldn't. They would just die very rapidly and very painfully. And so I was like, well, that's dumb. Like, we need to figure out a way to solve that, right? So, like, I sat down and I worked with them, and I was just like, how could we do that? And they're like, well, you would have to seal the puncture and then dress the wound, which you can't do because it's a sealed thing. I was like, well, what if we made like a sticky pack, right? Like, what if you like the med kit, like, like had the tools in it already, you like roll it out and you like stick it on around like a clean area, and then like you could work with like gloves with the tools that are already in there and seal them up. And they're like, I mean, I guess, so like I actually like drew it out and like designed it and like pitched it, I was like, this is how it would work. I thought about building a mock-up. Like when I say I go deep with my world building, like I really go deep, because the idea was like, if you take one little hit in space and you're just a goner, like losses are going to be massive, right? Like, and so I would have to like readjust my thinking on like, how that would actually go down. So, I wanted to make sure that I was approaching things from like a realistic standpoint, right?
Right.
Could we?
Oh
no, we lost Shady. Could we?
That's right. I'm another host, so we're good.
Okay, good. Could there actually be battles in space that like make sense and that people could live through? Hey,
Right.
Shady's back.
I think there's
I've just been making faces randomly, hoping that I could
Like
hide the
recording
fact
you?
that I was lagging. We'll see.
You totally went away. Your
Oh, did
box
I?
Yeah,
went away.
Yeah, box disappeared. Yeah.
Gotcha. That was that noise. Anyway, sorry, Haley. Go ahead.
That's okay. No, I was just one of the things that we haven't been able to touch on a lot with some of our previous guests is utilizing very specific resources at a really high level, which is what you've done for a lot of the work that you're talking about tonight. We have talked about a lot of fantasy and kind of softer science fiction, but if you have access to surgeons or somebody who's teaching a university course, or somebody who knows somebody, a lot of the times if you hit someone up and say, hey, I'm writing a book, they're like, cool, I would love to answer your questions. And I think people are often surprised that that's a resource for them. So that's a great tip. I hit up Shady's sister today because I had a medical question for my book. I was like, hey, please help me not look stupid, because she's a doctor. So I think that looking for
Neither
those...
of these people which told me that this conversation occurred.
It was not an exciting conversation, but she did, it was one of those things where it was like 2 sentences in my book that I had a resource and I took advantage of it, and she was super helpful. She'll go in my acknowledgments.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't know probably 90% of the people I reached out to, and I got told no a lot. But I was just like, hey, look, I'm writing a book. I want it to be like scientifically close. Can I ask you some questions? And one of the people that I reached out to like actually went so far as to like send me ship designs and like 3D modeled craft, and we're like, this is what a like real spaceship is going to look like, a real military ship is going to look like. Here are the things it's going to be made out of. Here's how craft are going to dock in space. It was super helpful. So yeah, I mean, just ask, just reach out. Like I think I posted on Craigslist or something like, hey, working on a like TV show pilot, need science help. Thanks. And then it was amazing, like how many people responded. And then I reached out to some
writer ISO.
Yeah. I reached out to some like, university professors like specifically, and a lot of them didn't have the time for me or like didn't understand the ask, but there were just like a lot of really cool people who were just like, yeah, like I'll help you out. And you got to kind of sift through it. Right. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I highly recommend just like jump on social media and put the word out, because somebody who knows the thing you're asking about. I almost guarantee it.
So I'm going to be everybody's mother for a second in stranger danger. Don't put your personal info in your seeking ads.
Yeah.
Your Craigslist ads.
Yeah. Like don't go meet them for coffee or something, or like get in their white van when they pull up, but like having a like, yeah, having a Facebook conversation is well, you know what? I'm not even going to say that. Never mind. Just be careful, be smart, be aware of your surroundings.
Yeah. And if you are going to go, like, even if they have a reputation, you can look them up. If you're going to go meet somebody in person, like, that's not terribly a bad thing. Just let somebody know what you're doing. So that way when your body disappears and reappears in the river, they know exactly who to pinpoint.
Right. Exactly. And meet in public, preferably with in a crowded area.
Definitely.
Next to a police station. It's not hard. Come on,
the
guys.
other piece, right? Like, and we talked a little bit about it on your podcast, James, but you're a huge extrovert. So this is something that you do relatively well. You're pretty good at the networking piece. You know how to talk to people. You know how to kind of like put the asks. For those of us I say those of us, I'm really
Those
not
of us.
part of that crowd.
Us
I'm
is me.
also, yeah, us is Haley. Who are more introverts. Like, you can lean on your friends too, right? Like, you almost always know somebody who knows somebody with the expertise.
Yeah.
You may not know that person personally, but you know somebody who knows that person they can vouch for.
Yep. Well, I mean, we're all maximum 7 people away from knowing Kevin Bacon. So if that's the case, finding people to talk science with you should be easy.
I feel like our connection point there is probably Kevin Anderson.
For Kevin Bacon? No, it's James.
Yeah.
I think it's James.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I was taking Anderson to Dune and Dune actors to Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be close.
Javier Bardem, maybe? Do you think Javier Bardem knows?
I think I'm probably 2, maybe 3 connections away.
Yeah, so you're closer. Not a surprise though.
Yeah.
Well, next time I visit LA, I'm gonna call James and be like, "Hey, I need you to set a meetup with this person so I can find this person so I can meet."
So I can meet Kevin Bacon. Yeah.
Kevin Bacon.
Welcome to the breakdown of Worlds Asunder, where we go completely away from the script. And that's all for this week, folks. We hope you learned something from James and his discussion on the differences between screenwriting and novel writing world building. If you weren't able to tell, we were getting a little tired there, a little loopy, pushing towards the end of that episode, having entered hour 2 of our recording. Speaking of, you should go check out James on Ink and Effort. Haley and I make an appearance on an episode for Author Communities. Thanks to Nick Thacker for hosting the platform for our podcasts. Go check all of our links in the show notes. That's where you can always find us to follow us. Next week, we'll have Only Writers into World Building, Part 2, with James Fox. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, thanks for helping us tear the worlds asunder. We'll see you next time.